Hi everyone, welcome back to Vintage Fashion Hat Chat. I hope everyone's wearing their poppies on this Remembrance Day. I would like to talk about some hats from the Edwardian era today, and then I will speak about the hat I'm wearing. I will start with my grandmother's wedding hat, and that is pictured in one of my books, Accessorizing the Bride, Vintage Wedding Finery Through the Decades. Sorry about the reflection of the ring light. Now, my grandmother was married in 1913, my grandmother Hillier, and this is the hat that she wore. This wonderful white ostrich feather trimmed, I don't even know, almost like you might call it a mushroom hat or an umbrella hat, very typical of the era. Many brides wore hats instead of veils on their wedding day. And it's funny because last night, sorry about that. Last night I dreamed of hats of that shape, and it probably prompted my memory to talk about that hat today. I wish the hat was still in existence. Many of the great hat stories that we've collected over the past over 20 years now for the Mobile Millinery Museum, many of the hat stories are about hats that are long gone. The reverse is true as well. Many people kept some fabulous hats from very, very long ago, but we have no stories to go with them, particularly when we've purchased them at an auction or flea market, etc. But anyway, my grandmother married in 1913, as I said. Of course, war broke out shortly afterward. Which brings me to Remembrance Day. I never knew my grandfather. He was killed in 1917. Now, this is his portrait. He was with the Royal Canadian Highlanders. He was a career soldier, didn't need to enlist, was a retired career soldier, but he did enlist. And as I say, he was killed in 1917. So all I knew of him were what my grandmother told me. And this portrait of him was always in her bedroom. And every year she would add another poppy to it. So by the time I came around, this was entirely encircled in poppies. Now, some years ago, when I suffered a lupus flare, which had me in bed for quite some time, my mother gave me a blue velvet box of letters, and these were letters that my grandfather Harry and my grandmother Jen had exchanged during the First World War. And they really do chronicle quite a bit of the war from 1914 to 1917 from Harry's perspective. And so I did compile them and into this book, Dear Harry, the first-hand account of a World War I infantryman. And that was quite an experience. I got to know him very well through the letters. And it was an interesting process because I'd never been shown them before. My mother felt that they were personal letters. And quite often throughout the book, he does talk about how he didn't want other people reading these love letters. And there's nothing racy in them, but they were Edwardians. They were very proper. Actually, my grandmother was born in I think she was born in 1888. Anyway, so I had some misgivings about publishing them, but that's again for another story. If I ever do a YouTube channel on dreams, I can fill you in with that, because it was a very interesting dream that sort of gave me the permission to go ahead. But that's beside the point. Today we're talking about hats. And I want to show you an Edwardian hat from that period. And this is from Britain. It's called a Bobby Dazzler. So the idea was that women, of course, this was during the first women's movement. They were very active in trying to acquire status. As yet, they were not persons under the law. And so the magnificence of their hats, particularly women of means, and also the lengthy hat pins that were used were an effort to acquire at least symbolic status. Now, the idea was if you wore one of these very lavishly trimmed hats, and this would have been on upswept hair. If you were in Britain, think that the streets of London, you're going shopping, you're showing off your husband's wealth, and the idea was that you would trim your hat so lavishly that hopefully you would turn the heads of the bobbies. So you would dazzle them. Now this particular one is very typical of the era. The basic hat is a black velvet. It has an inner crown. It's quite high. And ladies of that day would collect various ornamentation. As you can see, this one is primarily ostrich feather fronds. Also some velvet millinery flowers under here. Sometimes there would be birds, entire taxidermied birds. And I have written about that, and I can link to that in the description, as well as to my bridal book and my hat book. So these hats were certainly worn by upper class women in the day. And the particular trims on this hat, these ostrich feather fronds that are quite lavish and beautifully dyed, were owned by Florence Clark of the Clark Pork and Beans family. So just to give you an idea that this was a very lavish age, I thought the example of my grandmother's wedding hat was quite appropriate. And of course the Bobby Dazzler, which generally when we did our retrospective millinery fashion shows before the pandemic, this was always a showstopper among a couple of other very special hats. So I will also link to this book in the description box if anyone's interested. And I would really appreciate your comments and questions and your experience of Remembrance Day growing up, perhaps, and even as an adult, what it means to you. So I'll tell you a smidgen about the hat I'm wearing. It looks a little bit, my grandmother would say gay, in that old original sense. Rather cheerful for a remembrance, I wouldn't say celebration, but she always told me that she looked forward to meeting my grandfather again after she passed. And even as a child, she would tell me that, when she was to die, that I was not to be mournful. I was to wear red and to dance, because she would be going to her glory. A very, I wouldn't say a typical Edwardian sentiment, but certainly as a Christian, yeah, quite typical of her faith. So I think this hat then is rather appropriate. Now, I have shown it before. This is a beautiful piece by Maria Curcic. Vintage straw, these gorgeous silk flowers. I've done a little bit of alteration though, just to sort of turn them into poppies. I've given them the black centers, but I'll remove those after Remembrance Day, and they'll go back to having their red centers. So I will also link to Maria Curcic's website in the description box, and wish you all a good Remembrance Day. So I will see you again on Thursday. In the meantime, have a happy day.